It's such a pleasure to be here and to be reminded what is the uniqueness about the Asia Global Institute. I think thanks to Victor and William, generous support and the great support from the University of Hong Kong, Asia Global Institute has gone from strength to strength. But sitting here listening this morning reminded me, particularly under the leadership of Mike Spence, the intellectual leadership, this is a unique hybrid institution that, this is a unique institution that actually, embeds theory in business reality. And Victor reminded us that that business reality has moved to politics. And so, to sort of think about where my mindset has changed is that if I want to be reincarnated, I want to be reincarnated as a national insecurity advisor. Because it's not about national security, it's about everybody being insecure. So this morning has set the stage that we are, as Mike says, in perma-crisis. And the reason why we are in perma-crisis is because the old theory does not work anymore. And there are deeper historical reasons why this is. If I may put it very simply, if you look at Adam Smith as the father of modern economics and Karl Marx as the core thinker of social theory, both of them ignored natural capital. I challenge you, any of you, to look into Wealth of Nations and Karl Marx Das Kapital, how much they thought really about the environment. It was all about man versus man, okay? But the climate today is really the result of very complex human behavior that is destroying our environment. And that destruction is caused, and people worry about energy, worry about carbon, but really it's about our excess consumption. And our excess consumption can only be financed through excess finance because we're borrowing from the future to consume today. And in doing so, we destroy our environment because our theory treats this as an externality, treats the biodiversity loss as something, not costed in. And exactly as Mike says, all these costs are surfacing. And so when we're in this transition mode, with central bank monetary printing, we think there are no costs. But these costs are very real. And this is the core issue about this particular panel. And we're very lucky that we have three real experts here who feel passionately about this subject. Now, before you're all depressed, let me tell you the good news. The good news, my old mentor taught me, is not what the headlines say, but the headlines did not say. It's not about Mr. Xi and Mr. Biden talking, and that's really good. It's put a kind of a little stop to this continuous bickering. The real good news coming out of recent US-China was Sunnylands, because the agreement between the United States and China on supporting COP28, Paris Accord and Kyoto Protocol is, to me, groundbreaking and earth-shattering, because if it really succeeds, a lot of things will happen. So on that note, let me very quickly frame the issues that we have now. The McKinsey Global Institute has recently calculated that the amount of investment just to get to net zero per year is $9.2 trillion. Okay? Now, the global financial assets is $487 billion. Trillion. And so 9 trillion out of 487 is doable. But how big are the Bretton Woods multilateral banks, World Bank plus AIIB plus New Development Bank, et cetera, added together, 1.4 trillion. How big is the IMF? 0.9 trillion. 2 trillion on top, 2.5 trillion versus 9 trillion a year. How are we going to finance this? Right? So it's one fundamental issue. So let me start by posing these, realities on the ground. Huge, need for climate action, and how are we going to look at it or fund it? I first, go to Anil. Anil is Vice President from New Development Bank. Some people know it as BRICS Bank, but I think he'll explain what it is. He's thought a lot about this climate funding, sustainability funding issue. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And you have already framed the issues confronting us. Before I respond to the specifics, the panel's topic today, climate, investment, and sustainability, I believe it couldn't have been framed better. Investment is required on either side, whether it's climate or sustainability. For both, you need investments. And this climate is also included in the concept of sustainable growth. Unless you take care of the climate, unless you take care of the natural resources, sustainable growth is impossible. And we need growth to fund the climate issues as well. We know the numbers. The numbers are really large, huge, and trillions of dollars. Doable, but it has not happened. And what could be the reason? There could be multiple reasons. At some point in time, 1.5 trillion was invested in cryptocurrencies and NFTs. When NFTs and cryptos can attract 1.5 trillion, what inhibits investment in climate? This is the first question. Realizing this, the realities, the previous G20 presidencies under Italy, they set up a group to see how the capital adequacy framework could be enhanced for multilateral development banks to be more, to have more capacity to lend more. On top, another group came up, independent experts group, co-chaired by or co-convened by Mr. N.K. Singh from India and Professor Larry Summers from the US. They have spoken about $3 trillion that you need annually and for climate and sustainable growth. If we leave aside the number, to me it's very clear, and this new development bank, which many people know as BRICS Development Bank, was set up in 2015 to complement the resources of other multilateral development banks and mobilize resources for basically infrastructure and sustainable development. Our general strategy for 2022-2026 clearly lays out that one of the building blocks is sustainable development goals and climate. So both have been put together as one of the building blocks. And my sense is that to give traction, to give tailwind to this whole idea, we need to blend the two, sustainable growth and climate. We have spoken about climate as a problem to be tackled with, which requires X trillions of dollars. Probably the conversation now needs to start that it's an opportunity, because every time in the past, when an energy transition happened, the economy gained momentum. And this time, it should not be different. The economy should gain attraction. So if you look at grids, the power grids, electricity grids require a major revamp. Millions of kilometers of cables may need to be laid out. That's a huge opportunity. Solar and wind, which were considered too expensive, now prices have gone down drastically, and India has been kind of very gung-ho and very positive on solar energy. The cost is coming down. And the energy production in India is getting distributed. As small households, they have got these solar panels on the top of their roofs, and they are also selling back electricity to the grid. That's an opportunity. Hydrogen for making the shipping lanes cleaner, probably we need hydrogen. So that's another opportunity area. So in my view, and probably there is some convergence around it, we need to look at the opportunities and then look at financing, et cetera, there. And that will give us a much better traction. So I'll pause here and maybe we'll supplement as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil, for that very quick introduction on this very important subject. We now turn to Nisa. Nisa Leung is, I think, senior partner or managing partner of Qiming Capital. And she feels passionately about sustainability. So, Nisa, over to you. Tell us a little bit how you feel about what's your, reaction in China, etc.
Well, first of all, I'm actually not a sustainability expert. I'm more like a biotech expert. That's why I'm trying to tie in more with, sustainability. But one of the things that I want to start out with is saying that, we've invested in about 550 companies in China on tech and biotech. And one of the things that we really believe in is how do we invest in affordable, innovative healthcare for the world. And I do believe that that also goes in line with sustainability. As we're seeing so many innovative drugs, approved in the US in the last 18 months I think there are probably over a dozen drugs that are approved with over $1 million price tag. That is not sustainable for the world. And so how can we develop more therapeutic areas? How can we develop more devices, diagnostic, or even digital health that can serve China and the developing countries, and then also the developed countries? So that's something that we've been working on since 2006. And on the healthcare side, we've invested in over 220 companies. And I mean, a lot of times, 65% of our first money in is angel round or Series A. And I would say that out of the 200 plus company, 120 have grown to be subsector leaders in China in all these different areas, and quite a few of them are exporting, including, say, for example, one of our companies that is, now has grown from, when we first started, 1,000 square foot office to now the largest insulin company in China, in exporting to 35 countries worldwide. And then all of a sudden they're saying that, they really help drive the prices of insulin down, as well as a whole lot of other areas that we're seeing. So we work very closely with Gates Foundation, World Economic Forum, and lots of foundations to see how we can, Gavi and so forth, to see how we can help provide more affordable and sustainable healthcare. I wanted to give an example of a drug that was approved in U.S. Probably early last year, and it's actually the most expensive drug approved in the history of U.S. $3.5 million. It's a gene therapy for hemophilia B. It's developed by Unicure and licensed by CSL Pharma. Since the approval 18 months ago, there have been one patient administered with this drug. We have a company in Shanghai, and the founder was a University of North Carolina professor, so he co-founded two gene therapy companies in North Carolina. One was sold to Pfizer 4 years ago for $600 million, and the second one was sold to Bayer for $4 billion 2.5 years ago. And he said the third company he wants to set up in China because this is the only place where he can really build much cheaper, gene therapy. So since then, he's developed a 2,000-liter manufacturing site for gene therapy, which is the largest in Asia. And then also, it's the same size as the one developed by Pfizer in U.S., which is the largest in U.S. So now he just licensed out the hemophilia B to Takeda, and the price tag for that is $350,000, so 1/10 of the price compared to U.S. So the thing is, how can we continue to develop more, especially since there's so much unmet medical needs, especially when the whole world, it's so hard to fundraise. And I think we saw in the last 18 months, both US, VC, and even Europe, the VC funding has dropped 70 to 80%. Every dollar counts. And so the thing is, how can we get every dollar to move to much, much further beyond for the startup? So that's something that we feel, we're working very, very closely with the companies. And then also, I think, one of the things that I also want to tie into sustainability is, we do have a few companies. We've been investing in clean tech in China for 15 years. But at the same time, we're also starting to see some really interesting areas, because we've always felt that, if we want to invest in sustainability, the companies themselves have to be sustainable. They can't just simply rely on government, incentives and whatnot. So we're also starting to see, some of our AI drug discovery companies. One is actually working with 9 out of 10 of the biggest EV battery companies in China to develop newest material for the EV batteries for more, better efficiency and so forth. Another one, it's actually another company, AI drug discovery company, is actually headquartered in Hong Kong, and they are, interestingly enough, invested by Aramco, and Aramco has actually asked them to help develop, molecule in alternative energy. So we're starting to see lots of really interesting new technology being used. And incidentally, this company has also become the first company in the world, generative AI drug discovery, to use AI to identify the target and then use AI to develop the drug, and have 2 drugs now in clinical, phase 2 clinical in US and in China. And the first one is in liver fibrosis. They have another 30 drugs in the pipeline because with AI, they can churn out very quickly. But they also have partnership with Sanofi, where Sanofi paid them $1.2 billion to develop, co-develop 6 AI-derived drugs for global. So, at the same time, we've also started to look at synthetic biology to say, okay, how can we use synthetic biology in agriculture? So I think that's something, we've recently invested in a company, cultured meat. I think, some of you may have tried Just Eat, chicken burger. I thought that tastes pretty good. So instead of plant-based, could we be developing cultured cell-based meat so that, it could apply to, lots of areas and so forth. We've also started using RNAi to develop pesticide, which can potentially replace chemical pesticide, which is much better for the soil and so forth. And we can also develop pesticide a lot faster. So we're starting to see lots of technology applications for sustainability. And definitely these are areas that we're very interested in. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nisa, for basically laying out the realities of how to fund innovation so that we can actually make real change about sustainability issues. That is, really positive, I think. We now turn to Erik Solheim. Erik Solheim was formerly a Minister for Environment in Norway. Then he was Under Secretary General of the United Nations. And now he, really runs the Green Belt and Road Institute. So, Erik, let's hear your views on the way forward.
Thank you so much. And I really loved the discussion before this, because normally in this kind of conference, there is only pessimism. Here we heard a number of reasons to be optimistic from Michael and others, and I will take it a step further. We are the most lucky of the lucky. We are living at the most lucky moment in human history. Only people who do not know the past can get it otherwise. Look, when China and India came out of humiliation and colonization in 1950, life expectancy was below 30. It may have been around 28. Well, now life expectancy in China is 78, just past life expectancy in the United States of America. In India, 68. And I will not be surprised if life expectancy in India is also passing life expectancy in the United States. And if you are the luckiest of the lucky on planet Earth, you are a young girl born in South Korea, life expectancy is now 90 years on average in South Korea. And this is probably the most important singular number to measure the quality of life, because we all really want to live long. And then people will say, oh, but we have more wars. No, we have fewer wars, and they're much less bloody than in the past. Look, just across the bay here, the Taiping Rebellion started. It killed 20 million people. Just we don't, of course, recall it. During Second World War, 16% of the population in Ukraine perished. 16%. Horrible as the war Putin has started is not even close to the 16% killed during the Second World War. And bad as the situation is between the Israelis and the Palestinians, is not even close to any of the former wars like the Taiping Rebellion. So let's not despair, but let's get this can-do atmosphere on how to solve problems. And let me focus on the environment. I think all of you know that we have a triple environment crisis: pollution, destruction of ecosystems, and climate change. And I will not elaborate on that because I think you all know. But let me look to the solution. And the solution is now mainly provided from Asia. Just Europeans and Americans don't know, because our media is so biased. I came here straight from Chengdu. That was the conference of the solar industry, the PV industry of China. Well, that's 80% of the global market. China is now 80% of the solar industry, the most important energy industry for the future. And it's not just solar. China is also 80% of all new hydropower, 60% of the wind market, 70% of electric batteries, 70% of high-speed rail, 60% of electric cars, and probably 95% of electric buses. This is one nation alone. On every parameter, China is now between 60 and 80% of the new green technologies and the markets. And China is also dominating completely the value chains for all of this. No one should criticize China for this. But Europe and North America need to get up very early in the morning if you want to compete. And that should be, of course, the spirit. And then it's not just China. Look to India, the second Asian giant. Prime Minister Modi is launching green missions by the day. Green hydrogen mission for India, electric vehicle mission for India, electric battery mission for India, all basically using the South Korean recipe of using the state as a way to drive market change in business. And I give a lot of credit to Prime Minister Modi. Again, he also gets mainly bad press in Europe and North America. Well, he has completely transformed the Indian debate. In the past, the debate in India was, do we want to develop or do we want to take care of Mother Earth? And then, surprisingly, 98% of Indians wanted to develop, and a few environmentalists said, no, we need to prioritize the environment. But now that's not the debate any longer in India, thanks to Prime Minister Modi. It's all about how can we develop, bring all Indians out of poverty, create a large middle class in India like in China, but doing by going green. And of course, produce in India. In the long run, India will not just import the solar panels from China. It will have to make them at home, because there are 1 million young people joining the labor market in India every month, and they want jobs, and Prime Minister Modi is very well aware of that. So China is now the giant for the Green Revolution, But don't worry, India will be the second biggest solar power in the world by 2025. And Europe and North America is far behind. Just we are so self-confident and so self-assured in the West that we haven't realized it yet. But that's to the peril of Western industry because it will not be able to compete. 2 weeks ago, I went to CATL, the biggest battery maker in the world in Ningde in Fujian province. Well, they have 1/3 of the global market, this company alone, for maybe the most important of all technologies, how to store energy. 1/3. Then I asked the guys at CATL, who are your main competitors? And they said, by far our main competitor is BYD. Again, as you know, another Chinese company headquartered in Shenzhen, just across from here. And then I asked, who else? Yes, then they said, we have competitors from South Korea. And then I asked, do you have competitors from Europe and North America? And they said, basically, no. And we don't expect there to be competition from North America and Europe when it comes to batteries. So China is leading, but India is the second power. Then what are then the challenges? Because we have all the technologies, all the policies, and all the finances we need for the green revolution. There's no lack of money. It's not about funds, but it's about politics. And there are 3 main challenges. One, we need to take this view of the opportunities of climate change rather than the perils of climate change to the global arena. And agreed it's easier in China and it's easier in India than, say, in Africa. Because look, population of China, India, and Africa is now basically the same, 1.4 billion. China is one market. You can make something in Shenzhen and you can sell it in Heilongjiang. One market. China, India, the same. You can make something in Tamil Nadu and sell it in Kashmir. Well, these are distances longer than from my hometown of Oslo to far into Africa. But it's one Chinese market, one Indian market, and it drives down price. Because if you succeed in the Chinese or the Indian market, the price will need to be low, and then you can go also globally competitive. While Africa, 54 different markets, some of them very slow, very small, sometimes very badly run by politicians, and it's a much, much more challenging environment for sure. But also, Africa has a much younger population, and they have some assets which may drive growth in Africa in the years to come. But number one is to change the mindset into the opportunities. Second change, which is particularly important in the West, that is permitting. It now takes much, much longer to get the political permit to set up solar panels or wind farms than it takes to actually establish it. I spoke to Mats Nipper, he's the Danish head of Ørsted, one of the biggest wind makers in Europe, and he said even for offshore wind, which is the least environmentally damaging of all sources of energy, it takes much longer to get the permit than to establish an offshore wind farm. So that needs, it shouts for political solutions, how to make the necessary environment investigations and of course, dialogue with the local people, but doing it in a limited amount of time and get all the processes in parallel rather than one after the other, and not allow the court system to destroy what you have decided politically. These are challenges, particularly for the West, and we spoke about China's speed here earlier. India may not be still at the China speed, but India is also moving towards India's speed, and Europe and North America need to solve the issue of permitting if we want to get this fast. And lastly, the transition needs to be more fair, because otherwise we will build up a lot of political resistance. Let me put it in the Chinese context, but let's assume I go to a coal worker in, say, Shanxi province of China, and I tell that guy, wow, look at this enormous opportunity for China. Solar is now much cheaper than coal. China can capture all global markets. China will lead the revolution. And by the way, most of the jobs will come in the in the Greater Bay Area or in the Lower Yangtze in Jiangsu. That guy may not be extremely enthusiastic. The same, of course, in the United States. I mean, the jobs in the solar and wind are coming in Texas, in Arizona, and California. not so much in West Virginia and Kentucky. So people there tend to move them to politicians who tell them that we can stay with the past. And we have the same in Europe and basically everywhere else. And in many Western nations, there are now more votes to be gained to oppose the green transformation than to underpin it. That is a huge political challenge. It's a challenge also in China, which doesn't have the voting system of the West, challenge in India, but we need to make sure that we get a fairer transition, which means that governments need to provide funds, programs, and support systems for the Shanxis of the world, for the Kentuckys of the world, for the Jharkhands of the world to move to India, or for the Polish workers, to put it in the European context. If we can manage the politics here, we will move very, very fast into the green revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was a wonderful statement. You know, who said Europe was not represented? Not only that, you know, Eric is the most optimistic European I have seen for the last 3 years. But I think thank you, Eric, for setting up in such a wonderful, context, right? Now let's get down to brass tacks. I think the issue here is this panel is particularly well structured, and thanks to Hei-Wei, on doing this, because you notice we're talking about a pessimist here, an optimist there, a realist here, and somebody on the ground who's really thinking about how do we effect change. To summarize, if I may, Eric's basic statement, we do not lack the technical know-how to make climate change and deal with net zero. We do not lack the financing. The financial system actually can do it, but we lack the political will. And then we face a second problem, which I think Nisa has pointed out, and that is basically the bureaucratic system and the existing capital markets is such that is biased against risk-taking. Because basically banks are extremely conservative, right? The result of which is that we are not pushing enough right finance, right know-how to the key people who needs this. So I'm phrasing this so that I could then, allow, Anil, Nisa, and, Eric to respond from their perspective, and then we throw open the questions to the floor. All right? Very quick.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It was really very insightful to hear from Eric about the opportunities and what could be done. So I'll just compliment. And then some remarks which were made by Nisa. Actually, the solution also lies in there. In terms of, let me talk about NDB. Our membership is such that we host nearly 42% plus of the planet's population is, we can count as our members. In terms of carbon emission, per capita emission in our membership is very low. Aggregate, of course, has to be more for obvious reasons. We have more population, and our member countries produce for the world. So the global production hub being there, the consumption is taking place somewhere else. So given this configuration, it's very natural that our emission levels will be high. Our population is high. But this also gives us the lever to fix this the situation. Because what we do or we don't do will determine the fate of the globe. Because this 42%, because we emit and produce so much, and our consumption level will also go up. So the decisions that we take are going to have a far-reaching impact. Eric mentioned about the steps that China and then India and others have taken. In fact, in terms of capacity addition in the renewables, China has added more than 50% of the global capacity. So it's marvelous. And there is an internal realization. It is not driven from outside. There is an internal realization within our membership that we need to fix this environment issue, this climate issue. So that realization is very much there. Now, how do we solve it? How do we make it bankable? I appreciate this idea which Nisa quoted from the pharmaceutical industry. Technology, something which costs you $3.5 million or a $1 million price tag, you are able to bring it down. This parallels what happened in terms of solar energy cost as well. It came down almost a fraction, maybe 1/10 of what it used to cost. So how do we drive down the cost? And that requires investment in technology. So probably multilateral development banks also could focus on funding new startups, new technologies, etc., because initially there is high risk. And once we are able to have some proof of concept, commercialize it, the market will take over and the technology will spread across the globe. Technology has been spreading very quickly once it is established. And that may not require trillions. So the whole debate probably needs to shift, and we have put a number to the amount of funding required. Probably we need to put a number to the jobs that can be created by moving rapidly towards a greener energy system. And I'm sure once we are able to put a number of jobs that it will create, the political support, the social support will also be much stronger for a climate transition strategy than what it is. And thank you, Andrew said, realist. You know, we all saw during the COVID times when energy shortages happened, all countries, regardless of developed or developing, rushed to of all the sources coal, because that was the source which could give a stable supply of energy. So that tells us that you cannot really artificially compress the demand for energy. So given this, we need technology. We need to find out how many jobs can be created, and that will also support economic growth. The economic growth will bring in the resources that you need to fund the transition. So this is a very kind of synergistic relationship which we need to leverage. So I'll pause there, Andrew, and over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Anil. It's great. Nisa, would you like to say a few words?
Actually, I think, what Eric mentioned about the geopolitical, it's also, a sustainability mindset that we have. And we discuss that, regularly with our companies. What price, what discount should we be selling the products globally to make it such that, and then how much of the tech transfer should we be putting in Europe, in Southeast Asia, in US, so that locally the government and then also the population would actually appreciate what we're doing. And so it became a sustainable growth rather than, when, everything is manufactured in China. And so, we try to take as much of the gains and as much as possible. So we have that discussion quite regularly. And I think this comes into the formulation to the extent that, even though sometimes we could provide a 50% discount to what the US drug can provide, prices are, but sometimes the Chinese company would say, why don't we just provide a 15% discount because we don't want others to feel that we are really trying to grab too much of a market and so forth. It leaves us a question is this a good thing or is it a bad thing, right? I don't know, but at some point, every company is a little bit different, and it also depends on how much tech transfer we can provide, whether or not some will actually try to set up the R&D center somewhere, or some may try to do the API manufacturing somewhere, or the manufacturing somewhere else, and so forth. So that there could be jobs gained in all these different countries that we try to, or the regions that we try to go in, so everybody's happy. But I also want to say that, sometimes maybe we don't need to make those choices. So say, for example, when AstraZeneca is trying to push and sell their targeted therapy globally, one of the problems they encounter is, they have to use this companion diagnostic from the US, which is way, way, way too expensive. So when they're trying to launch it in Africa, they just can't launch the companion diagnostic because each one costs $1,000 US. So, by the time they administer these diagnostic to find out which patient has a mutation, I mean, it just doesn't work out, for the math. So they actually use one of our portfolio companies who has a similar companion diagnostic, but we're talking about $20 US. So then it becomes much more affordable, and they can launch it very, very quickly into Africa, and it's a win-win for all. So, so every model is a little bit different. Every product and sales channel is also a little bit different, and we have to work very closely in keeping that geopolitical mindset and the sustainability mindset where everybody is a win-win-win is important. And I also want to say on the automotive side, we're also seeing some really exciting besides the EV. Autonomous driving is such a big thing now in China that they're really leveraging on EV cars and so forth. And we're starting to see autonomous, robo-taxis, robo-buses. In fact, one of the companies that we're very, we seeded is now the largest autonomous driving company in China, and they were invested by NVIDIA and the largest bus company in China, which is the largest bus company globally, to roll out buses and street sweepers and things like that. So it'll be really interesting to see 5 years, 10 years from now how the automobiles demographics or whatever you call it would look like on the street. Thanks.
Thank you, Nisa. You reminded me that the Adam Smith, the free marketeer, would say, take all the money off the table. But Adam Smith, the moral philosopher, says, we leave the money on the table. Thank you. Eric.
When we focus on geopolitics, of course, one issue is in a completely league of itself. I mean, the relationship between the United States and China, that's basically what it's all about. If that can be managed in the next decades, I think we can solve basically every other global problem. However, if that were to deteriorate very badly, we will be in deep trouble for basically every issue, whether economy, peace, environment, whatever. So that must be managed. And I believe there are two key words. One is respect, the other is dialogue. The United States and China need to show respect for each other, and all the rest of us should show respect for both powers. And there is no reason why they cannot coexist. The United States will for sure not adopt the Chinese political system. It cannot, because that has 2,500 years history in China. So even if they wanted to, they cannot. But China will not adopt the American political system either. But there is no reason these two political systems cannot coexist, and they can be a win-win cooperation. They are not threatening each other if well managed. So there should be respect. And the other, there are doomed to be differences on how to solve Ukraine or Palestine, many business disputes, some companies who are losing will be complaining. All this will happen. Then there must be dialogue. And for business, I think restoring the World Trade Organization is probably the most important issue, because that gives a legitimate way of managing business disputes. Finally, I believe that the pessimism in itself is self-defeating. Look, basically every political leader of any significance in the world, say Donald Trump, except that climate change is a real big issue. I'm not aware of any importance who don't. Nearly all business leaders, whether in China or India, US or Europe, also see climate change as a major issue. And many of them, most of them, are actually on the daily basis trying to solve this problem. What we have not seen so far is a similar movement of the people. A really people's movement for the environment to put pressure on political leaders and business to act. And why is that? Maybe because the message from so many environmentalists is so negative. Just focusing on the negatives, sometimes also so boring. People fall asleep. You see this endless PowerPoint presentation on all the perils in the world, rather than trying to give some hope. Any major movement must present a hope, an opportunity, a can-do atmosphere, some solutions. And I believe that if we're transforming that conversation, we'll be much more likely to make the global people's movement for the environment to supplement the leaders in politics and business.
Thank you, Eric. Respect and dialogue. Conversation. Questions from the floor, please. Your opportunity. Anybody? Oh, sorry, can't see clearly. Yes, Toby.
Okay. So thanks to the panel for a very stimulating discussion. We have some issues in the United States. So first, my name is Toby Meyerson. I have a business giving business strategy and governance advice. We have a problem in the United States in energy transition, which is economic and political. If you sort of look at the micro level of trying to take an electric power plant that's run on fossil fuels and transition it to clean energy, first there's a technology issue. How do you do that? How do you transition a plant that's running and has to supply cities and can't be shut down? How do you transition that? You know, is the source of energy solar? Is it clean hydrogen? Is it thermal? The technology problem hasn't yet been solved. It takes money and investment to do that. We've made a small start with our infrastructure bill, which has basically got subsidies, but they're inadequate. The political problem is that private institutions won't finance that transition. Banks won't finance it. Institutional investors won't finance it. Why? Because they all have green scorecards they have to announce. And even if the purpose of the investment is to move from fossil fuels to clean energy, that takes time, and putting more money into something that's fossil fuels today is unacceptable, politically, economically speaking. So the problem we need to try to solve is to find the pockets of capital to finance that. And I'd welcome Minister Solheim's view on that. Some of us would welcome investment for China. You know, you've articulated the sources of capital and technology, but we can't bring capital politically into the United States today to transition power plants. You know, building critical infrastructure in our cities with Chinese sources of technology and financing would not be politically acceptable. So we're in, I think, Victor Fung's no man's land in a bipolar world. We've got a need. It's an urgent need. It's very hard to finance, and I'd welcome Minister Solheim's views or other members of the panel.
Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, I have strong views on this, but they may not provide an immediate solution. But I simply think that the United States of America need to solve the issue of the importance of the state. Look, China has constructed 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail since Beijing Olympics in 2008. The United States has, in the history, created 0-kilometer high-speed rail. But also Spain, Italy, France has constructed enormously impressive high-speed rail systems. Why? Well, this cannot be done by private sector alone. Nowhere in the world can you make this kind of basic infrastructure by the private sector. You need the state. I mean, of course, companies are building it, are private, and there may be joint ventures, but only the state can provide that for that. Probably that is the case also for the grid. It's hard for the grid to be financed just by the private players. You can make an enormously productive and commercially viable solar plant or wind farm, but the grid will be an issue where the state may play a role. And the issue of the state is solved in China. Some people will think that the state is too strong in China, but they have a very strong state. But the role of the state is also solved in Europe. And the best example of that are the so-called right-wing populist parties of Europe. They are not right-wing in any sense in the historical term, which was right-wing once a small state. All these so-called right-wing populist parties want a very strong state. However, a strong state which is favoring white European people and not migrants coming from abroad. But a very strong state which can lead the development, which can provide welfare to its people. So there is no debate in reality now in Europe about the issue of the state. And unless the United States comes to terms with the issue of the state, it will be hard. Because infrastructure, Eisenhower built the roads of America. It was not made by the private sector. It was made by the government. And so I know that you and me cannot fix this immediately, but at the end, it's about the state.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to answer that question? If not, let's, Toby, my view is there's no shortage of money in America. It's called the Fed. Whether they're willing to print it or not. I mean, that's the real issue. But that's another question. Anybody else? Sorry, over there. There first, and then Barbara.
Hello, thank you so much for the panel. I'm Jill. I'm Asia Global Fellow for this year. I've been working in tech industry last 15 years. And what we have seen as the new generation that Eric mentioned, that how many we are entering into new workforce, new generation are very willing to contribute to ESG and sustainability, and they are actually asking for that. When I came to Hong Kong, I dedicated my research on how do we engage the society, drive social engagement in ESG, and I'm coming from fintech, so I looked at ESG wallet. So what I've realized is that discussions are on government level, on business level, but what about consumers? Who is responsible giving consumer education first, who is not educated? Second, giving tools, and how do we monitor and trace the progress? Belinda mentioned about Starbucks, like Starbucks has pulse on every consumer. They can make so much impact. So is multinational companies on tech, but also startups on the ground. So it's not only bottom up or top down, but how that all comes together and creates some kind of holistic approach to engage social and create lasting engagement that passes generation and goes through. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, for that excellent question. Maybe Anil, why don't you talk a little bit about social exchange and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important and insightful question that you put across. ESG is now is a part of the framework and across banks, and we always use for each and every project that ESG considerations are factored in. To ensure that consumers or the society at large is also part of it, whenever we undertake as a multilateral development bank a project, let's say a bridge across a river, we engage with the community there and we talk to them. And surprisingly, we find that the awareness about climate, environment protection is very, very high. So it's not that they are willing to accept infrastructure, the cost of environment, or any of these ESG components. So that is a good thing that you don't have to impose. And that's why New Development Bank doesn't impose any standard. we say that we'll go by country systems because now countries themselves are demanding it. So we don't have to impose any external standard. So this is one part. Second part is that once you communicate, that communication part is very important. And the state also plays a role so that this communication is very, very seamless, smooth. And you talk to them, you explain to them the advantages and disadvantages. There is a lot of buy-in around that. So that's another positive that I have seen across our membership, and I'm sure that's the case elsewhere as well. So how do we drive it further in terms of ESG? As we all agreed that there is a need for change in the conversation, and we have to be more positive on that and bring out the synergies between growth, climate, in between all the ESG considerations, etc. And we have to leverage the synergies. Then people will not see, right now sometimes growth versus climate, that conversation I don't think has helped us a lot. ESG versus growth, hasn't helped. So this antithetical relationship has to go. And we have to realize that, long time back when we were students, we read that Club of Rome, Limits to Growth. Are we hitting that kind of a level where growth is unsustainable? Some people talk about these EVs as well, that 10 years down the line, you may not have all the critical minerals that you need to do that job. How do we fix this? Of course, technology will give some solution, but not the whole of it. So the entire society is now conscious of the problems, issues, what it will take to fix it. Probably I will stop by saying that the implicit model that we have in mind about the current state of affairs has to change. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. Time is of the constraint. Sorry. So the last question, Barbara.
I'm glad to have the last question. My name is Barbara Maynard, and I'm on the advisory board of the Asia Global Institute. I belong to the camp which call ourselves the techno-optimists, and I see, like them, or we see a future of abundance. And I totally agree with what Eric said, that we do have the technology and the capacity today to solve the world's major problems. And what I'm hearing is a mixture of the changes that are coming from the panels and yesterday and today, is that the progress is on a linear basis. But actually, if we accept the advances in technology and AI, everything is moving at an exponential, in fact, hyper-exponential basis. And for the first time in human history, we have the capacity to scale human beings. So my question to all the panel, and particularly to Eric, if that is the case, even if it's wholly true or partly true, what kind of global governance do we need, and how valid are the institutions we have today, which were developed in another era? Thank you.
Thank you. Eric.
I think that the main issue is that the technological change is happening so fast, and sometimes are done by people with knowledge which politicians do not possess. So the political system is always far, far behind. It's not really able to regulate. I mean, if you ask for regulations of the tech market, I mean, probably European Union is the key institution in the world. China is also trying to do something of that. I mean, for very long, we just saw upsides with internet. At least I thought they were on the upsides. Then we see it can be also a way of creating hate speech or fake news or lying, etc. So you need to find ways to regulate that. and the politicians are behind. And sometimes, I mean, for small nations, it's impossible to regulate alone, so only Europe, the United States, China, maybe India can really make regulations. So I think the biggest issue is how politicians should be up to speed to understand the change. And obviously, the most important technology now, as I can see it, is artificial intelligence, coming at an enormous speed with an enormous power. And we struggle to regulate it. We are behind. It was good that Biden and Xi agreed to have some high-level group to discuss artificial intelligence. There was also a meeting called by Prime Minister Sunak in the UK quite recently, which also brought the Chinese on board for a conversation on this. While that conversation will not solve all problems, it's much, much better than nothing. Finally, even if there are, I mean, obviously all these technologies have problems, but also they have enormous opportunities, and we should also not forget that. I mean, you mentioned autonomous driving. And most people in the world are still scared of autonomous driving. I can see only upsides. Man, the autonomous car will never drink. It will never fall asleep. It will never drive above speed limit. Well, these are probably the three main reasons for accidents. So if we can eliminate the main reasons for accidents, obviously autonomous car will be an enormous driver of positive change. And what is the biggest cause of death for young people in the world today? It's road accidents. For between 15 and 30, road accident is the #1 cause of death. Not suicide, not war, not terrorism, not malaria, not any disease, road accidents. And for sure, it will come down dramatically the more autonomous the cars become. So let's see all the enormous opportunities in these technologies, but let's have a conversation between the key actors and how we can regulate what we do not want, and how we can make politicians not to be so far behind the technological change.
Thank you, Eric. That was wonderful. Well, I'm afraid we're stopping you from lunch, so we have to stop here. I think you would all agree we had a great intellectual feast the whole of the morning. I just want to finish with one thing that Victor taught me. The whole idea of telling good stories is to give you the appetizer, and so that you wait for the main course to come. So Victor started this. He posed the conditions. Mike actually laid it out, and the rest of the panels have been, fleshing out where we are heading. But none of us know that right. But I think the main story remains to be told, and we hope that you will come back next year to the Asia Global Dialogue and join this intellectual feast. Thank you very much indeed. Thank Eric, Nisa, and Anil for this.